Good afternoon. So today I'll go back to talking about that verse from the Vajra Sutra that I started a few weeks ago. And so once again, it's a verse that comes right at the end of that sutra. And the Buddha gives 9 different similes or examples to illustrate how phenomena, in particular conditioned things, things that are arising from causes and conditions, impermanent and so on, how they are empty of inherent existence. And that's quite a difficult thing to understand. So the Buddha uses these examples of things that we can see and experience in our ordinary life that are examples of things that appear one way and exist another way, to help us to question if the way we see things is really how they are or not, and gradually we can come to understand emptiness. So we already talked about the first of the 9 similes, which is stars. So today I'll move on to the second one. So in the translation in the Blue Prayer Book that we recite often before teachings, the second example says Mirage. The Tibetan term for this actually refers to a kind of eye condition that causes people to see things that aren't there. I think the medical term for this is vitreous floaters, thanks to our friend, or just floaters to make it easier. So that's talking about some condition, internal condition regarding our eyes, whereas a mirage is more an external situation. But basically it's the same thing. We see something that's not there, something that appears but doesn't really exist. And so I thought today to talk about mirages, because I really like that one. Next time I'll talk about floaters. So one reason I like the mirage is because I've experienced it firsthand, whereas I haven't experienced floaters. So I can talk about this from my own experience. And so I grew up in Sacramento, California, and sometimes it gets really hot in the summer, like over 100 degrees or even 110 degrees. And if you're outside on a day like that, and if there's a place where there's like a parking lot or a road, you'll see this sort of shimmering, shining stuff that really looks like water. I mean, you could swear there's a puddle of water there on the ground, but if you go up and look, you don't find a drop of water. It's totally dry. Yeah. So have you experienced mirages? Has everyone seen a mirage? Also, it can happen in the desert. If you're driving through the desert, you'll see on the horizon this shimmering kind of stuff, and it really looks like there's a lake or a river there. You could swear there's a body of water over there. But if you took the time to go and look for it, you wouldn't find it. So it's just an appearance caused by these conditions, the hot sun, the dry earth, probably something to do with the air, the atmosphere. So another reason I like this example, because I think it's a really good illustration of what we're supposed to do with regard to trying to understand emptiness. Because according to the Buddha's teachings, at least the Madhyamika tradition that the Tibetans usually prefer, they say that the way everything appears to us is as if it's very real and solid and existing out there from its own side objectively, and we just kind of come along and see it. And we tend to just buy into the appearance. We believe things really exist that way. But we should investigate and check to see if things do exist like that or not. So with regard to our own self, it's recommended that we start with our own sense of self or I. So we do have this feeling there's an I, a me, somewhere inside of us that's like a boss, like a ruler, a controller, a CEO, or whatever you want to call it, that makes decisions and thinks and feels and does things. So it feels like that, really feels like there's a real I in there. And normally we just go along with that appearance. We don't question it, look for it. So the Buddha says we should look for it. We should check to see if it's real or not. Just as with a mirage, if we want to know if it's really a body of water or just an appearance, we need to investigate for ourselves. And if we do, we go right up close and look, we won't find any water there. And then we know, oh, it's just an appearance due to conditions. So in a similar way, we're supposed to investigate ourself, or what we're made up of, basically a whole bunch of parts, physical parts, body parts, down to tiny cells and molecules and atoms and tiny particles, and look through those and see if we can find this real I. And we can also look through our mind. It's a little harder to look in our mind, but we look through all the different parts of our mind, all the different experiences, and try to find this seemingly real I that is the boss, the controller, the inherently, independently existing me in there. So if we do this investigation properly, what will happen is we won't find it. The I, that seemingly real I, will vanish. It won't appear anymore. Just as the water in the mirage vanishes when we investigate it. And that's the meaning of understanding emptiness, the emptiness of that real, inherently existing I. But that doesn't mean we don't exist. There's nothing at all here in ourself. There is a body, there is a mind, and on top of that we label I or me or whatever your name is, Sangye Kadro or Tupten Chudran or whatever. So that does exist. That conventionally existing, merely labeled I, that does exist. But that other one, the real, solid, and independently existing I, doesn't. So that's a very helpful analogy. Investigating a mirage and investigating the I, or whatever object we're looking for. There's a similarity there. So I was thinking about whether or not this idea could be applied to the current situation, the pandemic, the coronavirus, COVID-19, whatever it's called, because this is what's very much on people's minds and in our conversations and so on. So many people are feeling frightened about this. For example, in yesterday's BBC, Venerable Children read a letter from somebody who's having panic attacks because they will have to start working with COVID-19 patients. And also I wanted to just add something to that I don't think there's any need to feel ashamed if you are feeling frightened or having panic attacks. It's quite normal. It's quite natural. And also, there's a couple of lamas, Mingyur Rinpoche and Sokni Rinpoche, were brothers, and both of them have experienced panic attacks, and they very openly talk about this and write about it. So, even lamas, Rinpoches, and they grew up in a family with, their father was a great Nyingma master. So even coming from that kind of background, they still had panic attacks. So I think it's just normal and nothing to be ashamed of. And they also give advice about how they dealt with it, which can be very helpful. So if you go on YouTube or look for their books, you can find that information. But yeah, so regarding this point of things being like a mirage, it could be very useful to investigate the object of our fear. If we are feeling frightened, anxious about the pandemic, about the virus, just to try to see more clearly what exactly is it that we are afraid of, and is it really valid to have this fear? Is there really something there to be afraid of? Because it might be in our mind that it seems like a huge monster that's taking over the earth, like the old science fiction movies I used to watch when I was a kid with Godzilla or something like that, It's going to eat us all up and destroy our planet. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but you might, it's really helpful to see, how does this appear to my mind? And does it really exist in the way that it appears? And it's really helpful, too, to look at things in terms of dependent arising, because they say that dependent arising is the best way to go about understanding emptiness. to just see how things come about as a result of so many different factors, the causes and conditions that led to it, the parts that make it up. So looking at something in that way kind of takes the heat out of it, takes the intensity out of it. It doesn't seem so huge and overwhelming and impossible to deal with. And also impermanence, just to see how it's changing all the time, every day, every minute, every second. And eventually it's not going to be there anymore. So it takes some time to do this kind of reflection or this kind of analysis. But it really does help, even if it doesn't lead to a realization of emptiness, but just to help the mind become more calm, more peaceful, and see this object in a different way than before, when we were totally caught up in fear and panic and so on. And if we do this kind of investigation, we might come to understand that what we're really afraid of is death. That's why this situation is so scary, because it might mean death for me or death for my loved ones. So then it could be very helpful to investigate death and what that is all about, and what is it about death that is so frightening? Now, this is a huge topic, and I don't have time to deal with it here, but I will be talking about this next weekend. We'll have a course on peaceful living, peaceful dying, so there I'll have more time. I don't mean this to be an advertisement for my course, but if you are interested in this topic, I love talking about it. I have a lot to say, and we can do meditations on it and discussions and so on. So, and there's lots of books as well, both from the Buddhist point of view and the secular point of view, that can help to reduce our fear about death and dying and make it something more manageable. Because there's so many things we can do to prepare ourselves for death, so we're able to handle it better when it does happen, either to ourselves or to our loved ones. So instead of just living in fear and panic, it's good to investigate this object that we are so afraid of. So, in short, in summary, remember this example the Buddha gave of a mirage, and how it appears one way, but it actually exists in another way. And you might want to try it out with something that's bothering you. You don't have to start with something huge like death or, the pandemic. You might start with something smaller, like maybe an irritating noise or an unpleasant smell, and just examine that and ask yourself, does it really exist in the solid way that it appears? And then contemplate how it's the result of causes and conditions and made up of parts, and how it's impermanent, changing, and just see how that affects your mind. And you'll probably find it really does help to reduce this emotional disruption happening in your mind. And if we get used to thinking this way, investigating this way with smaller things, eventually we'll be able to do it with the more emotionally charged situations like diseases and even death. Okay, thank you.